This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. I'll be joined in just a moment with John Shirley. Normally at this time, I have something interesting to say at the beginning of the program, and unfortunately, I don't have much to go on today other than I'm a little bit disturbed by the direction of the UFO field, meaning simply we've moved away from, I guess, more independent research and that sort of thing, and we're all kind of clumped around what the government is planning to do or attempting to do. And as I've said before, I see this as nothing different than what was going on in 1948. It's the same thing, just different players. So I'm a little bit disturbed about that. And I don't think we're moving close to disclosure, which a lot of people are interested in. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And we're not going to control it when it happens at that point. So anyway, that's just about it on that. I'm going to be joined here by John Shirley, who is an American writer, primarily of fantasy, science fiction, dark secret fiction, westerns, songwriting. Has written one historical novel, a western about Wyatt Earp, Wyatt in Wichita, and I might have to ask him about that. Was one nonfiction book. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of it. John will have to tell you what it is. He's written novels, short stories, TV scripts, and screenplays, including The Crow, and has published over 84 books, including 10 short story collections. As a musician, Shirley has fronted his own bands and written lyrics for Blue Öyster Cult, yay, and others. His newest novels are Stormland and Axelbus Creek, and you can see a picture of Stormland there by John Shirley. John, welcome to A Different Perspective. John? Hi, John.
Here I am.
We know that's not your fault. The one book I couldn't pronounce.
Gurdjieff?
Pardon me?
Gurdjieff?
Yes, that's it.
Gurdjieff, An Introduction to His Life and Ideas. It's a sort of semi-biographical dissertation on him and his ideas about the nature of the cosmos. He was a pretty influential, famous mystic who was his main thing was trying to get us to be all a little more conscious and a little more free inwardly. So he still has a lot of influence.
Well, I wasn't sure how to pronounce that, so I just stumbled over it, as I'm warned to do. I find at my own age I have a hard time speaking in coherent sentences and actual words. So there you go. I get the impression from our discussions and things you've written, in the world of UFOs, you're more of a skeptic than a believer. You're very skeptical of the ideas. What are some of the things that worry you about the UFO field?
Well, I'll say first of all that I used to write a column called The Skeptical Believer. And I wrote that for space.com. And it's because I sort of walk the line between skepticism and belief. I'm very open-minded. I know there are extraterrestrials in the universe somewhere. I mean, I don't know it personally, but it's just common sense. And most scientists think that they're out there somewhere in our galaxy, or at least in other galaxies. I'm a little skeptical that they have visited us, but I'm open to really strong evidence that they have. I tend to have a attitude, something like Arthur C. Clarke, who said that he'll believe in UFOs when they are flying saucers when they get close enough so he can read their license plates.
Well,
but what he meant is, of course, he needs to really, really see extraordinary evidence. for this extraordinary thing. I'm very open to it. I just want it done right. I want the investigation to be done right. And what bothers me about the field is sort of the opposite of what bothers you. Is that we don't have enough organized and mainstream scientific research into it. We have instead a kind of a Wild West of UFO investigation and out there. There's the Mutual UFO Network, if they're still around, things like that. But there isn't really a lot of there aren't a lot of Kevin Randles out there who crosses all his T's and dots his I's and is capable of skepticism and separating the wheat from the chaff. There are more people who are just they're so open-minded their brains have fallen out.
Well, let me say the MUFON organization still exists. I think they've been attempting to move to a more scientific methodology in their investigations, at least kind of
good. Well,
that sort of thing.
Good. I used to be a member, and I wrote for UFO magazine. I wrote an article debunking those UFO videos from Mexico that just turned out to be easily explained how those were faked. But I've always wanted to find strong evidence that extraterrestrials are visiting us, and I would be delighted to find it. And I for one, no, I'm not going to say I for one welcome our alien overlords. I'm going to say I for one welcome the involvement of the National Aeronautic and Space Administration in UFO studies. They have said in a statement that they're going to study them, and they have expert scientists who can really analyze the evidence in a disciplined kind of way. And they said that it's difficult to draw scientific conclusions about the nature of some events thus far. So they want to apply scientific rigor, is the expression that they use. And that includes, looking for signs of life beyond on Earth. And they figured it kind of fits into that part of their overall bailiwick or something. They study water on Mars, for example, to see if there's the possibility of life there is one of the reasons. They are open to the possibility of life on certain moons of Saturn and Jupiter. So that, they have decided that they're going to take part in the UFO study in a really rigorous sort of way. And that, I think, is what we need. And they have enough independence from, for example, the CIA or the Air Force or something, that maybe they will be more trustworthy for the average UFO enthusiast.
Well, let me ask you, you keep talking about evidence. What would you consider good evidence other than a spacecraft in your front yard?
Something that, if there were artifacts, they'd better be really closely studied, and they have to be studied. They have to be, studied in a most reputable possible venue. MIT and so on, but I think the photography that we've got, the videos, there are a couple of them that are intriguing, especially we saw them, some of them in the recent hearings in Congress, and they're showing, small circular-ish objects, small, relative to the viewer, and we see them moving, and at least it's something physical that we can look at, apparently. And one of them was very intriguing. It was the footage shot from I believe it was an aircraft carrier, and they watched the thing moving interestingly in over top the ocean, and then apparently diving into the ocean. Anyway, it splashed, as they said, it went down. Now, of course, the problem with these is that they could be misidentifications of conventional objects, especially one thinks of drones of different kinds. And we tend to fall back on this idea that pilots and military observers are never going to make a mistake, but they're human beings, and also these things are happening very quickly and at a real distance, and the ones where they seem to have almost intercepted with the Navy jets, it's just a flicker, really. So it's the possibility of misidentification is very strong. I remember years ago. Go ahead.
I have to take a break. When we come back, we'll discuss the types of evidence that might be more persuasive. And I'm thinking things like radar tracks with ground visual sightings of the object as well that goes along with that, and photographic evidence, video evidence, that sort of thing. I think there's an awful lot of persuasive evidence in that respect. You are listening to A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle, as I've said before, and you can see more about my investigations at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and we will be back right after this, so please stick around. And we are back, as you can see. I don't know why I had to announce my name in the last segment, but there you go. I'm here with John Shirley. We're talking about UFOs, the nature of skepticism, and there's some other things we'll get to a little bit later. When we went away, we were kind of discussing the Navy videos of unidentified flying objects. I was always worried that this might be a glitch of some kind in the electronics as they integrate new sensor systems into their combat operations centers and that sort of thing. There was a video that was made, that was shown on YouTube, where a guy had connected night vision goggles with a video camera or a digital cell phone or something like that, and he was able to replicate a number of the videos in that way, suggesting some kind of a glitch between using all this new fancy equipment.
Possible.
But what I wonder is, other than the videos, is there some area of evidence? The level land sightings, which I talk about periodically here, where the objects interacted with the environment, causing car engines to stall, and it was multiple locations over a period of a couple of hours with multiple witnesses independently observing the same sort of thing. That sort of thing I find kind of persuasive, suggesting some kind of outside force that we don't understand.
It's some sort of phenomenon. It could be related to something like ball lightning, which could affect your the operation of the electronics in your vehicle.
Except ball lightning is extremely rare, if it even exists at all in that kind of a state. I think there's still some scientific argument about that. But it would have been persisting for over several hours in the level land area, because the report started around 11 p.m. at night and went through 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was over a wide area. Ball lightning is normally, 18 inches to 2 feet in diameter when it's there. It's very short-lived. We're talking about estimates of the size of the object up to 100 feet or something like that, and in sight for 15 minutes.
These are estimates, and if you see, was this at night?
Yes.
And then at night, it's really difficult to estimate the size of a thing in the distance. It could be closer and smaller than it appeared. And then,
John, let me interrupt here, because the problem with this is this. What I'm talking about here is the thing was close to the ground. Mm-hmm. It was within 50 yards of the car. It stalled the engine. And so ball lightning at 100 yards isn't going to stall a car engine, and it's not going to last for 15 minutes. And sure, the estimates of the time might be off, but 15 minutes is a long period of time. And so these sorts of things bother me. And what I see in the skepticism, and I'm not criticizing you, but what I see in the skeptical world periodically is assumptions made about the sightings without understanding the complete context of all of the sightings. In the Levelland area, I'm talking about sightings over, like I said, several hours and multiple locations and multiple witnesses, calling the sheriff, calling the police, the Air Force becoming involved. And
it really sounds like some sort of intriguing phenomenon took place there. What year was this?
1957, November 2nd of 1957. And then there were subsequent sightings of objects in the next few days in other areas where they observed the same sort of phenomena, cars being stalled by the close approach of the UFO. So there's some kind of electromagnetic effect there.
Well, even if it's not ball lightning, the Earth is this big, vast, pulsing sphere that gives off all kinds of electromagnetic effects constantly, and some of it comes from space, indeed, but it is a result of alterations in the way that the sun is putting out particles, for example, can create all kinds of effects. It could have been something on the nature of a really large solar flare, and that created an electromagnetic pulse in the area. And that could also have created some kind of visual phenomena, like something like the Northern Lights. And now, if you think that's stretching, well, how far are we stretching to just jump to the conclusion that it was an alien spacecraft?
I never said that.
So we know that the sun causes electromagnetic effects and disruptions here on Earth.
Well, these were very localized. And what I'm saying is it was also associated with a description of an oval-shaped or an egg-shaped object that was close to the ground, and there were landing traces found on one location, suggesting something had touched down there. And I'm not saying this is proof of extraterrestrial visitation. I'm merely saying here's a very interesting phenomenon that was not well investigated at the time, because the Air Force and NICAP, which was the civilian organization that seemed to have the more scientific orientation at the time, were busy arguing over the number of witnesses, as opposed to investigating what had been seen and what these people experienced.
Well, and also another phenomenon, though, is that suppose that you had this electromagnetic phenomenon, you had problems with electromagnetic pulse of some kind, and cars stalling mysteriously and so on, and it really was a real pattern. And this is in 1957, and this is in the context of a time when UFO reports were coming fairly often, and there's a lot of science fiction in the air. And then so people are seeing this phenomenon happen, and and then you might ask, well, how many people? Was it like 50 people actually saw a physical object flying, or was it 5, or was it 1? Because
there were a number of
some
people.
of this could be basically, somebody getting excited about one phenomena and sort of imagining the other one.
Well, there was a number of people who saw an object, including the sheriff, including some Air Force officers who have gone missing in that respect. But the other thing you have to understand, this is not an isolated event. This electromagnetic effects that we're talking about here in Levelland has been reported. I think the first report was in 1909, where a guy's motorcycle was stalled by some object off in the field, and it's persisted till today. And I didn't mean to get dragged into an argument about the.
I'm just speculating. I'm just looking at different sides of it. But I really think it's a fascinating report, that one. I've got to look it up more and get it. Is it in one of your books?
I did a book called Levelland.
Well, I'm going to get the book,
which you can get online from Amazon for a very cheap price. But it looks at the phenomena. It focuses specifically on Levelland, but it also brings in an awful lot of other sightings of this nature up through around 2020, something like that.
Right.
So
something was going on. Yeah, but the question is what?
Yes, absolutely.
Something was going on.
And I'm with you. I'm sort of on near the fence. I think I'm on the extraterrestrial side of the fence, but I'm within arm lengths of it, and I can hop back to the other side quickly, depending on where things go. So I understand being sort of a skeptical believer in that respect. But I just thought that the nature of the evidence there, because we had so many witnesses involved, we had so many independent witnesses involved in this sort of thing, and it's something that is, like I said, has been reported over the years in different locations, and it was kind of an intriguing case to take a look at.
Yeah, it's a good one.
When we when I communicated with you about coming on the program here, you'd sent me a note about the Washington Post had an article about a secret file or something that had just been published, and you were going to look a little bit more into that, sort of a MJ12-ish type thing. Did you have an opportunity?
Yeah, it's been around. This thing has been around since 2002, I think. And it kind of originated from a guy named Eric W. Davis, who did a little work for the United States Air Force in research. They gave him $25,000 at one point, in fact, to study literally the conveyance of persons by psychic means and transport through, I'm looking at my notes here, transport through extra space dimensions or parallel universes. So that's what this guy was into, Eric Davis. And he gave him a 78-page report for $25,000 with much dissertation on wormholes and parallel universes and then just sheer speculation. You know, I would have written it 100 pages for $25,000. They should have asked me.
Honestly, I'd have done like 200 pages for $25,000.
Yeah. So, you know, and he is a guy his office Warp Drive Metrics is in Las Vegas. And then so he claimed to have met with an Admiral Wilson and named the specific person and he claimed to have sat with a guy in a car in a parking lot and discussed crashed UFOs and aliens, and so Wilson was then interviewed recently by reporters, and he said never met the guy, don't know who this Davis is. And here's the thing, though, you could say, oh, he's just denying it, but he was able to show that Davis said that he was sitting in a car with a guy with a lieutenant commander and a petty officer, and they were all in uniform. And he said, I was not in the Navy even at the time that Davis said this happened. I had already left the Navy. I was not hanging out with anybody in the Navy. I wasn't wearing a uniform. And he was able to show the records that he was not in the Navy, and he was not in Las Vegas either. This supposedly happened in Las Vegas.
Let me break in here because it's time for a break. I'm not familiar with the story that you're talking about. It's been around for years. The story's been around for years as well.
Yeah.
I'm here with John Shirley. His book is Stormland and Axel Buck's Creek, and my blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I see I'm running out of time, so I will say we will be back right after this with John Shirley, and we'll be talking more about UFOs and strange things that go bump in the night, so stick around. And I am back. Not surprisingly this time, I was ready for it. We were talking about the Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson conversation that took place supposedly in Las Vegas. I was not aware that, I knew that the Admiral had said it never happened. He wasn't involved. I didn't realize that I hadn't heard, I suppose I should say, that he wasn't in the Navy at the time and hadn't been in Las Vegas at the time, which kind of shoots the whole thing down. But if Davis is the guy I'm thinking of, he also was talking about the Kingman UFO crash being real. I don't know if you're familiar with the UFO crash in Kingman, Arizona in 1953.
I vaguely. Why don't you bring me back? Bring that one back for me.
This was a story told by Arthur Stancil. Couldn't remember his name there for a moment. Arthur Stancil was interviewed by a couple of teenagers in the 1970s when UFO magazines were big, and talked about how he had been taken to Kingman, Arizona to do some work on a crashed UFO. And he had a strange notation on his calendar that said, he had something important to do that day. So that was his proof that he was there. Don Schmidt told me about a lady named Judy, and her last name escapes me at the moment, but she supposedly said that her husband had been involved in this as well, and her husband then deployed to Vietnam and was killed. But before he was killed in Vietnam, he'd written this letter about this stuff that had taken place in Kingman, Arizona, or the crash at Kingman. Their daughter got in contact with me and said, no, my mother made these things up and it's not true. And my father wasn't killed in Vietnam. In fact, he's alive and well, and that sort of thing. So the Kingman case to me kind of blew up. And I was surprised that Davis mentioned that as being one of the real UFO cases. I was surprised.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, he's also, claimed that he could work out how to transfer people from place to place psychically. How do you take this guy seriously?
I never did. When I first heard the story, which was a number of years ago, and I may have addressed it on my blog at some point. I don't even remember if I thought it was interesting enough to do that. But the problem simply is there are so many people out there telling these bizarre stories. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the problems we have with the field, is that we have the people talking about these strange things that go on out there and plug themselves down in the middle of it. The one that always cracked me up was the guy who claimed he was abducted when he was a teenager. He'd fought on Mars for 20 years. some kind of alien Earthmen allies.
Right, I vaguely remember that guy, yeah.
And then he was transported back to his body, and he'd only been missing for 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, how can you take this seriously? And yet people do. My friend Brad Steiger, I knew Brad Steiger pretty well. And he was talking about Al Bielek, and I'm sure you know who that is, the guy from the Philadelphia experiment and come down from the future and all of this stuff. And Brad Steiger was a really nice guy. And his philosophy was he would believe what you told him until he found a reason not to believe you anymore. And he was good friends with Al Bielek and believed his story. And Brad confided to me not long before he died that he was very disappointed now because the story turned out not to be true. And yet I still see in the news feeds on the internet, Bielek's story being told about how he's a participant in the Philadelphia experiment and that sort of thing. We have an awful lot of that sort of thing in the UFO field. I'm sure you've run into some of that.
Well, yeah, see, there's a constant problems with things. There are some really, really intriguing sightings, like the Navy pilot sightings, and the ones that you were talking about, the subject of your book. But there are also a lot of things that are, on the face of it, kind of absurd. People lose touch with their own common sense, their capability of recognizing probability. I mean, what is more probable when it comes to the Philadelphia experiment, for example? If you think about it, it's pretty, it was a highly improbable thing in the first place, and it would always be more likely that it was a hoax or rumors that became inflated from person to person and that kind of thing. And but the UFO field, as much of it is, keeps resurrecting people who have been debunked, and then kind of like putting those people in the forefront, putting too much energy into that and less into the really good stuff. You are not one of those people. You have always been very solid, Kevin. But there are people who keep bringing back Bob Lazar, for example, and a guy who claimed that he was at Area 51 and that he saw flying saucers in hangars and alien bodies and so on. This guy keeps being debunked. It's been shown that he lied about his background. He lied about his education. He lied about where he worked as a researcher, supposedly. But people decide to believe him anyway, or they dismiss that, or they say that's government disinformation. Oh no! Although it was just ordinary reporters who found this stuff out about Lazar. But there's no complete. He's still being interviewed and popularized on YouTube. Very popular guy there. There was the podiatrist who kept finding alien artifacts in people's feet, and they were supposed to be implants from aliens, and they were in heels, and they were these weird little objects. And when those objects were examined by actual scientists, it turned out that they were bits of bottled glass with calcium deposits on them, because people step on little slivers of glass and then your body coats them with calcium, and they come out with these little eerie looking objects that are just an artifact of the human body interaction with the ordinary environment.
Well, here's a question. Here's a good question.
The point is that this guy is people still bring up his story. And last I knew, he was still showing these alien artifacts at UFO conventions, even though it's been totally debunked.
Well, the problem with Roger Leir is A, he's passed away. B,
okay, he's not doing it now, but people are still showing his stuff.
And the other problem is, when looking at his stuff, I was wondering about the problem with an alien implant in the foot. Wouldn't you implant something closer to the brain if you're going to implant somebody? But Leir was taking stuff not only from the feet. He would have to get somebody else to remove them from other parts of the body, because he was not licensed to operate above the knee or something like that. Yeah, I was never really impressed with Leir and what he was doing and the implants. And the implants never really turned out to be anything that you could point out and say, well, this is of alien technology, or this is some kind of alien metal that we just don't have on Earth.
Yeah.
But Leir was very serious in what he was doing. I think he truly believed what he was doing in finding these implants.
I think he did it first, and then he was kind of invested. And that happens, people realize that they're, on the wrong track, and then they've gone too far that way. I think Barney and Betty Hill might have been like that.
Well, I think Phil Klass was like that. And that's a guy from the other side of the coin,
Right.
The skeptic. I think that Phil Klass came up with an idea in the 1960s that an ionization of the atmosphere was causing a lot of these UFO sightings. That's why you see a lot of them near power lines and that sort of thing. And atmospheric scientists such as Dr. James McDonald, who taught atmospheric physics, said, no, they don't glow like that, and it's just not true. And I think Klass just took it as an insult and began his rabid debunking of everything, no matter what the evidence showed. And if he didn't have evidence, he'd make it up. And so we have that kind of
Klass, people have personalities, and sometimes they get into personal things and lose their objectivity. So I guess Klass did that, but there are more reasonable skeptics out there, and I'm an open-minded one, really. Show me good evidence. I'm very interested in reading your book. Well, I really like the book you did with you partnered with some other people to do it about abductions, so-called.
Yeah, what really annoys me about that book is this. We did all this research, we came up with the ideas, and we published the book, The Abduction Enigma, which kind of exposed how people can be drawn into these belief structures.
Mm-hmm.
And then Susan Blakemore did a book out of Harvard, which said basically the same thing. And she wrote her book 5 or 10 years after we did, never mentioned our work or anything else. And yet her conclusions were basically the same as ours, that alien abduction is probably, and in most cases, the result of some kind of terrestrial involvement, such as sleep paralysis. And I always say
something I have experienced myself.
And I have to say, you know, I'm not saying that all abduction experiences are sleep paralysis, but I think a good many of them are. And then you look at how the hypnotic regression takes place, and you can see how the people are led into the specific arenas that the researcher wants them to go. And I think I think that if you look at that book not as just a debunking book, I think it is a skeptical book. Here are some questions we have based on the research we've done. And I think we interviewed 316 people who claimed to be abducted.
Right.
We noted a disproportionate number of homosexuals in that population. Not saying anything wrong with homosexuality, merely saying there's a disproportionate number there. And I think Mark Rodiker at the Center for UFO Studies found a disproportionate number of left-handed people in the abduction population. We don't know what that means, but we found these kind of abnormalities, which
has something to do with the psychology of the person, makes them more prone to having some kind of.
Well, let me break here because we're going to have to do it one more time here. And when we come back, we'll maybe explore alien abduction a little bit more and some of the other problems with UFO research. And I think there's a great deal of problems in the UFO research that we can correct from the outside, make it look a lot better. So I will be here with John Shirley in just a moment, so please stick around. And we are back. I'm here with John Shirley talking about, I guess, skepticism, among other things in the UFO field. Once again, his book is Stormland. His website is john-shirley.com. So if you've got some questions or want to see more about him, you can take a look at it there. Has some skeptical views on UFOs and that sort of thing. Before we end the conversation here, let me ask you one question. Is there some UFO sighting you're aware of that you find particularly intriguing? Other than Levelland, of course.
Well, I like the one where they seem to see something going into the ocean that shows some physical interaction with the environment that adds a little something to it. And there's some video there. I still think I think that it has been noticed that our airspace is really crowded now with all kinds of things. There's everything from plastic bags to Mylar balloons definitely cause some occasional UFO reports because they're shiny and they move in curious ways because every little wind and crosswind makes them move around. And it's difficult to tell how big they are. But also drones of different kinds. I had a close encounter with a drone here. One came near my head and buzzed me, and it was one of my neighbors screwing with me. Actually, I think it was about 2 yards across, but I watched it go, and it went toward the airport, and it went just into the kind of flight zones over there. And later there were reports of something seen from one of the aircraft flying nearby. Coincidence? I don't think so. And then how often does that happen to even Navy jets? And we know that the Iranians, the Chinese, and the Russians are using drones of all kinds for reconnaissance, and they're experimenting with moving them into different kinds of airspace. And with a drone is not being terribly large, you can move it in under most radar. They could be pretty common visitors to us, and a lot of these reports are around military craft, different kinds, military bases. I think that we shouldn't. This is one of the reasons that Congress is taking more interest in it, in the whole UFO study thing, is because of the security risks that these things might represent, especially the ones that have been seen by our pilots recently, our jet pilots, is that they could actually be experimental craft from places like Russia, or a new breed of drones and spy craft of different kind. And they and a drone can also carry weapons. So they're a serious security risk, and that is some of the motivation for Congress allocating money recently to look more closely at UFOs, not just the extraterrestrial problem.
Well, one of the things I've noticed, and getting reports from all around the country, is the Starlink satellites are being reported frequently as UFOs. I mean, I don't know how many there are. And the SpaceX rockets, I don't know how many pictures I've seen now of the SpaceX rockets. They say, well, here's
the Starlink things, are they the Elon Musk satellites? Yeah, because there's thousands, aren't there?
Well, they seem like every time you turn around, they're launching a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
So they're all over the place. And the SpaceX launches, they have a picture of a solid object and then this rim of mist or light around them, with really kind of intriguing pictures. And they're very interesting pictures, but we know what they are. But I don't know how many times I've seen reports where people we saw this bizarre thing, and here's a photograph of it. You go, yeah, that's a SpaceX rocket.
That's a SpaceX device.
And the thing is, they'll be launching from one place, and hundreds of miles away, they'll be able to see these things. So it really kind of confuses people. So there's an awful lot, as you mentioned, going on in our atmosphere now that confuses people because of the way our technology is exploding. Yes. Not only the drones, but the Starlink satellites and the SpaceX launches and some of the aircraft we're creating in the next generation of military aircraft and commercial aircraft and that sort of thing. So
what this all says to me is that the UFO field needs to have the discipline, the rigor, to separate out the all the distractions and all the muddying effects from all these other factors, like drones, like Elon Musk satellites, and also people with absurd stories, like the Bob Lazars out there. They have to be able to set those aside. If they want the truth, they're going to have to focus on the relatively few UFO reports and evidences and interactions that we can actually count on. And I think it was you yourself at some point said it was something like 4%.
I don't think it's that high.
Like 2%, maybe you said.
Yeah, the number of actual UFO reports, the unidentifieds, if we get sufficient information, I think is probably somewhere around 1% to 2%
of the total reports, right?
Total reports, yes.
Right, yeah. And that is that. But see, 1% to 2%. Well, that's worth looking at.
And it only takes one.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It only takes one genuine visitor from outer space to be very, very, very important.
And I think it was Carl Sagan who said we could expect one visitation every 10,000 years. And I'm thinking, when did you start counting? If it was 10,000 years ago, they're due back. And if it was sometime, say, in the mid 17th or 18th century, now you've got an alien visitor looking at our moving in toward the industrialization of the world and that sort of thing. You understand that there's sentient beings on Earth building a civilization. You might be inclined to come back more frequently. And I look at the sightings from 1973. There was a period of about 6 weeks from the middle of September to the middle of November of 1973, where we had lots of UFO sightings. What always struck me about that is in this wave of sightings, you saw an awful lot of the craft on the ground. You saw the beings outside taking stuff, gathering plants, gathering animals, interacting with the environment. I said, this sounds to me like graduate students coming to Earth for their PhD dissertations, or gathering our primary research so we can go back to our home worlds and analyze all this information and that sort of thing. So I always thought of it kind of that way, because they were doing the sort of things you would expect someone visiting here to do, to understand more about what the culture and environment of Earth is about. but we have other sightings where waves where the sightings are, there's just lots of sightings of the objects in the sky and that sort of thing. But this was one where they came down and touched on the ground.
Well, if only there had been footage. If only,
some very intriguing.
If only there had been something corroborating that one.
Well, there was some very interesting photographs taken, and the other problem is we've dealt with the debunkers as opposed to the skeptics, who will throw mud at the wall, so to speak, throw explanation after explanation at a case, hoping that somebody will buy it, and not looking at it rationally and scientifically, and say, for some reasons, the debunkers can't say, this one's puzzling. We don't know what it is. It may be alien. It may not be. We just do not have an answer.
Well, their attitude is that, I mean, some of them probably are unreasonable, but the general attitude is that to always skew toward probability. Yeah, and probability would suggest half a dozen explanations over the extraterrestrial one.
But my point simply is this: they will accept an explanation even if it does not fit the facts, even if it does not fit the descriptions of the witnesses. It does not fit what was going on, and there's nothing to corroborate the explanation. They'll accept that. And I understand wanting to accept a terrestrially based explanation as opposed to an extraterrestrial one, because it's more likely terrestrially based. But what I'm saying is simply that if there isn't a good match of the facts with the explanation, then it should be rejected as well. It should be looked at as skeptically as some of the great UFO cases are. Well, here's evidence of a flying saucer from another planet. We should look at the skeptical explanations with the same vigor we look at, like, can we disprove that this was an alien spacecraft?
Well, yeah, science would actually, when a lot of these guys who are talking skeptically about these particular sightings and they're throwing out this and that idea, they're sort of winging it because they don't have a lot of, they don't have a piece of an alien spacecraft to examine. They don't have quite enough data for a full scientific study. So they sort of wing it. But ideally, there should always be two sides of the possibility, and yes, the scientists should be skeptical about dismissive claims from skeptics, as well as just embracing the extraordinary claim. And if there's a real study, that's what they would do.
We have to break it there. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, and we've gotten into the crux of the conversation at this point. We'll have to take it up at another time, I think, and look toward that explanation. The book we were pushing for you is Stormland. The website is john-shirley.com. My blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. If you have a chance, take a look at the Levelland book, which we talked about today, and take a look at Understanding Roswell, because I think it gives you a whole different perspective on the Roswell case. I will be back in 167 hours with another edition of A Different Perspective. So thanks for stopping by.